Welcome to Honest Whispers Review. On this video, I'll be reviewing Masters of the Universe Vintage Teela 5.5-inch action figure, released by Super7 as part of their vintage collection line back on May 2019. She comes with a sword and a shield and 5 points of articulations, 1 at the neck, 2 at the shoulders, and 2 at the hip. She also comes with the power punch feature. Basically, you twist her waist, let go, and she swings back with the punch. I'm going to go over 6 different categories to review this. First category is design. Basically covers the look, the concept, and the posability. And as far as the concept goes, this is basically the original action figure redesigned to look like the character models or character design of the original animation. And even though she has 5 points of articulations, she's really not that posable. The only thing you could change would be the direction she's looking at through her neck, or raise or lower her arms. That's either holding the shield or the sword. Now, as far as her legs go, she has 2 joints, a pivot joint and a hinge joint, but due to the way her legs are sculpted, one straight and her right with a slight bend to her knee, if you want to keep her standing, this is really the only pose you could do. Now, when I did an unboxing video, actually, just to make her stand, I had her standing, but her upper torso was slightly tilted in this angle. I did kind of made some adjustments, so she is standing up much more straighter now. So this is really the only pose you can do, and even at this position, she's really not that stable. Any bump to the table or the shelf that you're displaying her on will definitely tip her over. But still, the look overall I do like. It actually does look pretty close to the Club Grayskull version that was released by Super7 a few years earlier. Again, overall look is nice, but then the back here, there just tends to be a bit of a gap between her leg and her costume, or at least her leg and her butt. So it just kind of looks like a bit unproportioned. And it even, in some angles, looks like she's wearing like a diaper, just the way it's just so much gap and the way it just sticks out a bit. And the fact that you really can't do much posability to this, and it's not like anyone's going to be playing with this, like pretending like she's walking. Even on the box, it says adult collector. So at this position, or the way, you really can't do much posing, or at least with the leg. I mean, if they added an ankle joint or possibly even a knee joint, I don't think a knee joint would make that much of a difference, but definitely with an ankle joint might have made a bit difference if you really needed to pivot her legs back a bit more. But I find that gap to be quite unnecessary and just doesn't look good. Otherwise, overall, it does look pretty nice. Much better than the original action figure that was released in the 80s. So that's why I give the design score a pretty high 8 out of 10. Next category is sculpting. Pretty much covers the details, the execution and quality of the sculpt. And starting from top to bottom, you can see some details to her hair. I like how they didn't add too much details, like trying to sculpt every strand. And the simplified look really works well with this, and does kind of resemble the way she would look from the animation. Overall look is quite accurate. Now, when I do look at the breastplate, it does look nice overall, but I would have still liked to see a bit more definition to the lines, especially where the ram horns are that makes up her breastplate. You can see the lines are quite dull and rounded. And if you compare it with the Club Grayskull figure, definitely has much more sharper lines. Another issue which I kind of have is I guess the front piece of her costume, which is kind of like a loincloth, but in this case, they sculpted onto her costume. So it looks more like, I guess, a glorified jockstrap, because when you look at the original animation, it's supposed to be hanging down a lot lower. Not a huge issue, but still something that's definitely noticeable. Otherwise, the legs, overall sculpt looks nice. I feel the thighs are a bit thick. Still looks nice. I wouldn't take a hit or give a hit to the score just because of the thighs. But when you do compare to the animation, just overall proportion wise, it's not as bulky looking. So when you look at her here, it just tends to be more rounded out. Otherwise, still looks proportional and looks fine. Just something I wanted to point out. Now, the back of her costume, particularly her butt, looks pretty much, it looks nice overall. I do like how they added a subtle butt crack, and you could see the line on the, I guess, the upper part of her butt cheeks. So that does resemble how she would look in the animation. Although at least in the animation, the lines were quite defined. But due to the fact that it's so much bigger than her, at least her upper legs, so that it creates this gap. Again, in certain angles, it almost looks like she's wearing a diaper. And I think it would look better if at least her waist was a bit more narrowed down, just to give her more of an hourglass shape, especially when you look at her from the side. Now the boots are probably one of the best parts. I like how the fur and even the wrinkles on her boots where her ankles are, just nicely sculpted overall. Top of the fur is smooth, but then you can see a lot of details, at least on the bottom of the fur. So it looks great overall there. So again, overall design and the sculpting, especially the hip right here, I think they could have done a better job. Otherwise, the way she turned out looks pretty good. Face overall looks nice, but then you can see how she really doesn't have much of it or any cheekbones. Her cheeks come out kind of flat, so in certain angles it does kind of look like she has like a baby face compared to, again, the way she's supposed to look in the animation. So that's why I give the sculpting score a slightly above average, 7 out of 10. Next category is colors. Basically covers the accuracy of the coloring, the quality of the paint, and quality of the paint applications. And one thing I want to point out is that depending on the part, it's made out of different colored plastic. So for instance, her arm and her legs was made out of the skin tone plastic color. Her upper body is made out of this bronze plastic color, and her hip or butt is made out of white plastic. So you can see some, I mean, if you look at it closely, especially like her breastplate area or her chest, it has a nice shine to it. Basically, that is the plastic coloring, and then they colored the skin tone where her shoulders are. And then for her arm, it's a skin tone plastic, so they colored the I guess the bronze color for her armbands, and then the white for her wristbands. But even so, like, it does look quite close to it. You could see that difference between her chest and her armband. But of course, when you look at the animation design, it's supposed to be the same color. So not a huge flaw. I still think it's quite accurate and does look good overall. Now, as far as the paint application goes, don't see much squiggly lines. A lot of the lines are pretty much straight, and you really don't see too much lines that's bleeding over its border, especially when you look at it from afar. But when you start looking at it real closely, you do see some bleeding right there. For instance, at her upper armband, you could see some bronze colored into her skin. You do see some squiggly lines right here at her shoulder. And even on this side, at least this shoulder, you could tell when you compare to the other side, it's much more straight and lined with the border. And then here on the upper armband, you could see some bleeding, especially on that front side area compared to the back. And then of course right here, the wristbands overall very, very nice. And then not too much issue here on the front piece, but then when I look up close right here on the top, you could see slight, I guess just very slightly, some bleeding. You could see the white where it's on the, I guess, her upper right part of that piece. And then of course on the side of the, which is kind of supposed to be like loincloth, I guess they couldn't really tell which part. I mean, I would have painted the bronze onto that, the flat area of her shorts or bottom part of a jumpsuit. So it does tend to look a bit weird the way it kind of sticks out like that. Now, the sword and the shield, they're not painted, but then they used colored plastic, gray for the sword, and then this burgundy for the shield, which is quite accurate, as you can see when I go back to that picture as reference. But then when you look at the shield closely, almost looks like there's like scratches on it. You can see these lines, and it's almost like certain areas it looks like it's been swirled. Now, when I touched it and felt the surface, it is completely smooth. There's no sign of it being scratched or anything like that. So the plastic they used, it just created this kind of swirl. I mean, not really stains, but just like swirled marks and lines. But something you would have to look quite closely at. So it does kind of resemble what you might see on some kind of marble. Otherwise, when I look at it from afar, it's much harder to tell unless it's reflecting off the light. And then the fur, overall nicely painted. Really don't see much bleeding at all. So for a figure this size, around 5.5 inches tall, it is overall really nice. Again, it's hard to really spot any flaws, and if you do, you really have to look at it very closely. Now, you do need to compare from figure to figure. When I bought this figure, I picked out the best looking colors, and then one of the figures, which is the one that I didn't buy, it had a messed up lip. I guess the color of the lip was slightly messed up, so half of her lip looked like a Joker smile, so it looked really off. Now her eyebrows, even though everything's all symmetrical and straight, I would have preferred if they drew the eyebrow much more in an angle, like I guess best way to describe it is if they did it like an upside down check mark, would have looked much nicer, because it would have resembled the way she looks on the animation more. So you can see the shape of her eyebrows much more in an angle, sharper, and again, looks like an upside down check mark, which would have been nicer if they did the same thing to the figure. So that's why I give the color score still near perfect, 9 out of 10. Next category is packaging. Basically covers the design and look of the packaging. And this packaging is basically a bubble card or a blister card packaging. And it does come with a little card, which basically covers a bit of a history of the original figure and the animation and the reason why it turned out the way it did. So better than nothing, of course. And then on the back, which I also like, it has this nice original art or picture on it. And of course the details of the Power Punch and then other figures that came out in the same line. So the overall look, very nice. Does kind of resemble the original figure, or at least the packaging of the figure. And actually have the, I should put this here so that way it kind of gives you that look before it was unpacked. So I do like the overall design. That's why I give the packaging score a 9 out of 10. Now, next category is value. Pretty much covers the retail, suggests the retail price versus the quality, and then the retail price versus the aftermarket price. This figure, I bought it for $23 at a local comic book store. One of the reasons why is because I wanted to be able to pick out the condition of the figure, or at least its paint quality, and also the condition of the packaging as well. Now, you could probably buy this online still for $19.99 with shipping. I guess some stores may have free shipping if you buy a certain minimum amount. So with that said, I think it's definitely worth it if you're a fan of Teela or the old Masters of the Universe series. Again, huge flaw with her being so unstable. If she had some better stability, it would be much better. And as far as her aftermarket value goes, definitely too early to really say how much she'll be. But just from my experience, the fact that the way her other merchandise, whether it be a statue from Pop Culture Shock or the Club Grayskull figure that was released by Super7 a few years earlier, both of them, the value has gone up quite a lot. So I wouldn't be surprised if this went up in value once it's completely sold out from stores. My prediction would be maybe around 50 to 100% in about 5 to 7 years or so, give or take. So in other words, I would say 5 years from now, probably wouldn't be surprised if you would have to pay at least $30 to $40 just to buy this figure, or at least a new one. So that's why I give the value score a pretty high score, an 8 out of 10. Final category is overall, pretty much covers the 5 prior categories: design, sculpting, colors, packaging, and value. And again, overall, I do like the look of this figure, especially the fact that it is very close in resemblance to the original character model or character design of the animation. Again, biggest flaw for me would be her instability and the gap between her legs and her costume. Otherwise, everything looks great. I definitely recommend it, and that's why I give the overall score a high 8 out of 10. So to recap: design 8 out of 10, sculpting 7 out of 10, colors 9 out of 10, packaging 9 out of 10, value 8 out of 10, and overall 8 out of 10. Thank you for watching. Until next time, continue reading the King James Version Bible and eat your vitamin C's daily.